We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in volume 29. This is the first Sicha for the Parshas Voeschanan. In this Sicha, the Rebbe compares the two verses in which it talks about division, Horeisa, to know and to perceive Hashem. So in the first pasuk, it doesn't say details, Bashamayim, Ba'aretz, just say perceive. But in the second, to see, in the second pasuk, it says, "V'yadaita yom b'shaboyso levavecha," and it says, "Hashem hu elikim b'shamayim emav l'oretz b'tochas." He goes through different levels. The Rebbe will explain based on Shara Yichud ve'Emunah, very detailed sikha about that there are the level of godliness of creation in each one separately, in each part, in Shamayim, in the Oretz, and also in between Shamayim and Oretz, as the Rebbe will bring down from the Medrash, and the Rebbe will explain that there is a godly chayis which dresses up inside, and therefore the pasuk needs to specifically mention that, notwithstanding the level that this is a material world and this is not sense godliness, and yet it still is all Hashem. It's Hashem who Elikim. He's the power, and there's nothing else. We'll go step by step. We're learning Lilu Nishmas, Rav Levi Yitzchok ben Chaim Tzvi, Tehei Nishmas Yitzrura B'Tzrera Chaim. Inside. Aleph. In Haitike Sedra is eine Farad Zwei Psukim. In today's portion, Sedra, there are two verses. Was inyonom is the amuna un yidias. Their idea of these verses is the belief and the knowledge, both as a belief and also to know. Ki Hashem hu ha'elikim. Hashem is the force of everything. Hashem is the elikim, the power in everything that exists. So these two psukim, however, differ in the way they describe this. The first pasuk Aleph is Ator Harei Soladas Ki Hashem Hu Halikim. You have started. You showed us, so that we know by Matan Torah, the Eibishter showed us, so that we know Ki Hashem Hu Halikim. Hashem is the force of everything. There is nothing besides Hashem. There is no details in this pasuk, but by saying there is nothing besides Hashem. There is no categories and there's no specific learning for different things. We're just saying Hashem is the Elikim, the force of everything. There's nothing besides Hashem. Base number 2. The other pasuk speaks already with more detail. Know today and take it to your heart. Figure it out in your heart. Ki Hashem hu ha'elikim. That Hashem is Elikim. He's the force of everything. And here the pasuk says, Bashamayim mimal, in the heavens above, Vala oretz mitochas, and on the earth below. And then we say Ein Oid. There's nothing else. As we'll see soon, what exactly all these three verses are coming to include. In the Merishtim Pasuk states Stam, in the first verse, it just says plain, Ki Hashem hu Elikim. God is Elikim. God is the force of everything. In Zweiten Pasuk states Beprotius. In the second verse, it says in detail, Havaya hu Elikim. Hashem is Elikim, the force, both Bashamayim Mimal, in the heavens above, Aloretz Mitochas, and the earth below. So why is this divided here? So the Rebbe says on a very simple level, it would seem the difference is the first pasuk is talking about what was shown by Hashem. And the way it's from Hashem's perspective, we were shown, it makes no difference. We don't go into details. When the pasuk tells us that we should perceive it, that we via daito, and to us, it takes a difference. First, Bashamayim and Haaretz, so there's differences. So by Pashtus is a chilik zwischen the zwei psukim, simply the difference between these two verses. The erste pasuk, the first pasuk when it says that you have shown so that we know, speaks Kipirusha Pashtus is as simply interpreted. About that knowledge that was shown to the Yidden during Matan Torah. They perceived it at that time. They were shown that Hashem Elikim, Damul Totzir, the Ebrish Taraplek to Eden. The Hashem at that time revealed himself to the Yidden. V'roshu Yichidi, and they saw that there's only one Hashem. Und wie bald das Eden haben dann gesehen amitas Yehuda Yisborach. Since the Yidden saw then the true blessed unity of Hashem, vidos is mitzad dem Ebersten, as it is from Hashem's perspective, was legabe Yisborach is nitokin chiluk zwischen Shemayim and Oretz. Relative to him, blessed, there is no difference between the heavens and the earth. From Hashem's perspective, there is nothing besides Him. That's why in this knowledge, it doesn't really make room for differences in the knowledge. The heavens above, the earth below, it doesn't make a difference. So therefore, there is no differences. So you shall know and you should reflect, etc. Is atzivu elohodo. That's a command to the person. As darf sich misyage sein zu verstehen, that he needs to put an effort to understand, und wissen and to know, und arabtragen elovavecha, and to bring this down to his heart. Ki Hashem hu elikim. We're telling that Hashem is elikim, that He's the force of everything. Sees the idea v'akore nachdusa yisborach. That's the knowledge and the recognition in His blessed unity. There's only Hashem. Bos kumt al yidei giyas ha'odom. That comes from the effort. The person has to work hard to come to that recognition. Umitzad yidiyas ha'odom is faran achiluk tzvishun shamayim va'oretz. And from the perspective of the person's knowledge, there is a difference between the Shamayim and the Oretz, to know that it's only Hashem. Ba'ofen as yeder prat, in such a way that every detail, B'Shamayim mimal, Ba'Oretz mitochas, is a besondere idea. That the details, that the heavens above and the earth below, is a separate knowledge. So we have to know them separately, because from the perspective of the person, there makes a difference. And that's why the pasuk has to detail a little bit. And this is actually what it says in the Medrash. It actually, seems a fitting explanation. But the Rebbe is going to explain how this is take a fitting explanation, that by the person there could be a difference, as the Rebbe will explain. But this is actually when we state in Medrash. It says in the Medrash, so what does the Medrash say on the pasuk v'yodaito? It says Yisroin Nosan, and it goes. The Medrash talks about the different levels of recognition of Hashem Elikim, that these were different steps. As we see, the Medrash brings different people, the extent and the level of their knowledge of Hashem Elikim. There's various different verses. In some verses, it is totally Hashem Elikim, but there was also other forces by Yisrael. Then there is only Bashamayim Voretz, as the Medrash says. Yisrael nosan mamesh b'avodus kacham. Yisrael gave a substance to idol worship, shenemar, because he says, "Ato yodaiti ki godel Hashem mikol ha'elikim." while he acknowledges and he recognizes, I know now, Ato Yadaiti. He says, I know that Hashem is greater Mikol Ha'elikim, that is greater from all gods, from all forces. That means that there is Elikim, Yisrael view. But he says that Godel Hashem, that Hashem is greater than the other forces. Mashma, as the Matnas Kuna translates, Shehem Gedolim, they're also great. Aval Hu Godel Mehem, but he is even greater than them, as explained by the Matnas Kahuna on the Medrash Ram. So he didn't give the Eibishter in the recognition of Yisrael full force to Hashem. He said there's other forces as well, but Hashem is greater than him. Then comes the Medrash says Naaman. Naaman hoide b'miktzas mimena. He agreed to part of it in the Nevi'im. It says Shenemar. This is a pasuk in Malachim Beis. It says, "Hine no yodaiti, behold, I know, ki ein elikim bechol haaretz ki im Yisrael." There is no God in the land but by the Yiddish God. So basically, he recognized that ein elikim bechol haaretz, harei shahid al haaretz. So he only testified, Naaman, that the earth, there is no God besides Hashem, besides the God only by Yidden, Hashem hu elikim ba'oretz. Harished ala oretz, aval al shemayim. Matnas Kuna explains, that means that Naaman testified and he agreed that on the earth there is no God besides Hashem, but he did not mention elikim. He didn't say bashamayim imal. He just said al ha'oretz, b'chol ha'oretz. And then Rochov, the story about Rochov, they came the spies from Yeshua. So over there, she already mentions also the heavens and the earth. Sham Tuhu, she places the Eibishter, both Bashamayim and V'oretz. She places the Eibishter in the heavens and the earth. Shenemar, because over there the pasuk says, Ki Hashem Elikeichem, Hu Elikim Bashamayim Imav V'oretz Mitochas. Because your God is the force, Elokeich is the God, is the force both in the heavens above and the earth below. So that means that she recognizes that the Eibishter's Hashem, Elikim is the force both above and below. Nit nor ba'oretz. Not only in the earth, but also in the heavens. In which your eyes don't see, from the Yalkut Shemoni. There too, the Eibishter is Hashem Elikim is the force of everything. But it's still Shaira b'chalolo shel. It's still left over in the hollow of the world, which means we're talking about the Oretz, we're talking about the Shemayim. What about between the space, the cholol? In between the world, didn't talk about it in the Rochov's words. But Moshe Somoy Av B'chalolo Shel Olam. But Moshe placed Hashem also in the hollow, everybody, Shenemar, because he says like this, Ki Hashem hu elikim b'shamayim mimal, the heavens above, al haaretz mitochas, on the earth below. And he adds, Ein oid. What is it? There's nothing else. This adds a chalolo shalom. But we see over here there's differences of recognition and appreciation and knowing Hashem. This means as the idea kashem holikim that means the knowledge that Hashem is Elikim as it comes through the effort and the grasp of the human is eingeteilt b'chalus indrai, that is generally divided into three parts. Bashamayim imal aleph, number one, the heavens above. Beis valoretz mitachas, and two on the earth below. And Gimel ein oid, and number three, afil b'chalol shalom, even the whole of the world. These are the three levels: the Shamayim, Oretz, and ein oid, the chalol shalom, which we see different people came to the appreciation. So there's different levels of the recognition. Okay, so this would mean that people would come to different recognition in different ways, they different pieces, some Hashemayim, some Oretz. But the Rebbe argues that we have to say that since Torah mentions all these three details, are actually three different levels. It's not just because people will make this mistake, but there's actually three different levels in the manifestation of godliness. There is a level of Bashamayim, there's a level of Oretz, and there's a level of Chalol Shalolim. These are different manifestations. And the Rebbe's questioning is going to be, well, if you realize that Hashem is only, why would there be differences? Why would you not come to that recognition as a cloud? How come it's divided into this product? We'll see inside. That's what the Rebbe is getting at. Base. And darf aber haben abiyur. We need, however, an explanation. From them, the fact was Toiras emes zog di drei protim. True Torah says these details. So these are true in their mitzvah for Yedaita. In this mitzvah to know, the true Torah tells us that you need to know these things. Is move on, so it's understood as the chiluke yediyah hanal, the differences of the knowing that we say above. It is not only to caution us that a person who is lacking may make a mistake and he'll think one of them. So the Torah is addressing each one just to take away a mistake. But rather, there is actually an inherent difference between the way Hashem is Bashamayim and the Oretz. It's not only so people don't make a mistake. Nor does Bavais, but this actually points to the show. This shows us as be'inyan habaya hu elikim zainadochi lukim, that there is actually a substantive difference between Tzvish and Shamayim, Oretz and Chalol Shalolim, that there is a difference between the level of Shamayim, the level of Oretz, and then the hollow of the world. B'shas that Odom halba v'yodaito, when the person is at the level that he knows his knowledge does haste. That means when you are really reflecting and knowing, when you have a reflection and a knowledge based on the true intellect, there is a separate novelty in knowing each one of these things. There is something special knowing that Hashem is Bashamayim, Hashem is Ba'oretz, and Hashem is Chalol Sho'ilim. But why is that? How could we distinguish that in reality if it's all based at the Eibush? There's nothing besides Hashem, so there's nothing in Shemayim, nothing in others. How would this be different realities? How would this be different levels? As the Rebbe will explain later on in the Sikha, that there is actually a hislapshus in each one of these levels of godliness, and therefore there is actually a difference. But let's go step by step. So we need to understand. Was for an ort is do in Seichel zu sagen? What room, what space is there logically to say, as Hashem hu alikim, that Hashem is alikim is chaz v'sholem nor b'shamayim imal, that Hashem is the force of everything only in the heavens. because we're saying there's different steps. Und zu lieb them, darf man aber schon sagen. That's why we need a very clear, specific instruction about Loretz B'tochas, also in the earth. Und noch a dritten Chiddush, and then we have a third novelty that ain't oid, afilu b'chalolu shalom. There is nothing else, even in the hollow of the world. The Rebbe wants to say no. That the Rebbe just cautioned that now that maybe one would think that this is taka not thing to do specifically with the different knowledge, but there is a known idea that some think some of the opinion, actually this is the opinion of the Goyim, that the Roma called Goyim Avaye, it's not like the Eibishter doesn't have his force that he can use everywhere. But they say that the Eibishter doesn't bother with this low world. What the Eibishter takes care of is the worlds above, but this world is not important to the Eibishter for the Eibishter to be involved over here. And that way we would say that the Pasuk says, Bashamayim, Mimal, Valoris, Mitochas, is not just because a person, like we said before, will make a mistake over here, but it's actually, the Eibishter's force is everywhere. But it comes from the perspective that the Eibishter is too high, too great for this world. So maybe the Pasuk wants to say, Bashamayim, but the Eibishter is also Ba'aretz. But the Rebbe bases it on the Geras, Ashar Yichud Ve'amunah, that it's not so. It's not that this world is Pasuk coming to tell us that this world Hashem is also mashgiach and supervises and takes care also in this world, notwithstanding of his greatness. That's not what the Pasuk is talking about, because the way the Alter Rebbe explained this Pasuk, that the Pasuk is talking about that there is Hashem in the Oretz, and the Alter Rebbe asked, Metachas Loretz, in the fish, that the ocean and the fish, is there a God of? So you see that it's not this general idea that Hashem is also down in the world, but there is actually a very specific issue that we have with the idea that Hashem is even in this world, even in this Oretz, as recognized that Hashem's force is here, that Hashem is Elikim, even though. Let's look inside. It would seem that we can answer Api HaYadua based on what is known. The Pirush HaKosov, as we explained the Pasuk of Rom al Kol Goyim Havaya, Hashem is exalted over all the nation. Havaya is exalted over all the nation. Ados was Goyim Nemen on. The fact that the nations accept the idea as Ozav Hashem es ha'oretz, that Hashem has neglected, let the earth go on its own. Why is it Nemtzich der Fun? This comes from the idea, was they meinen, they are thinking, as in dem besteht the Reimemois von dem Eberster, that this is what the greatness of the Eberster consists of. And that's why they think that the Eberster's greatness dictates Romal Kol Goyim, that he should be above this world. They halten, their view is, as he is a hashpola for the Eberster zu vernehmen sich mit Nivroim lemata boretz. It's a degradation for Hashem to occupy himself with the created being below in this world. Und der River. Hotter die Hanhoge und Schlitter auf zwei Haaretz. So therefore, the care and the dominance on the armies of the earth, meaning all the forces down here that are here in the earth, he has given it over in the stars, the constellation. They should monitor what's going on, but the Eibishter doesn't bother. It's not according to his level. He's too high for this. Und der Vater darf der Posik ansagen. So that's coming from the perspective that Hashem is too high for this world. The Vater darf der Posik ansagen. That's why the Posik needs to instruct us. V'yadaita goimer ki Hashem hu elikim. That Hashem is elikim bal oretz b'tocha say no, that Hashem is in this earth. As der Eibishter is der shalit oichal oretz, that Hashem is the dominant force also over the earth. So then this posik would be telling us not that there is a special Elikim, Hashem Elikim in Oretz, but it's just telling us that Hashem didn't leave the land. Hashem is not above. But the Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say that this is what the posik Hashem Al Oretz Mitochas is coming to tell us. We see from the Alter Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe is saying that the Pasuk is coming to tell us that there's godliness also here so that the Aretz doesn't obscure for Hashem, that Hashem is even in the Aretz, not because of the exaltness of Hashem, but to tell us that even while the Aretz looks like it's an independent, maybe Hashem does not reach here, not because Hashem doesn't want to reach it because of his exaltness, but it's because from the Alter Rebbe we see that the pshat is that the pasuk is trying to tell us al haaretz mitochas, that the Eibishter is notwithstanding all the obscurity, the materialism of this world, and yet Hashem is here in all that. And the question we'll have to answer is, why would we think that these materialism, this world, would be an obstacle and would not be under Hashem's dominance? Zogt aber der Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe says, as der Posik v'yadaita goimer v'al haaretz mitochas, this Posik, that you should know, and there's nothing under the ground, kumt shoyle zayin, is coming to negate nidam tosanal, not coming to negate and reject the mistake as Oz of Hashem es haaretz. Hashem left over the earth to the stars, the mazolis, and that's what the pasuk is coming to tell us. No, that the Eibishter is still taking care of this world, even though it would seem Roma Kol Goyim as that. No. Noratos fun elikim nishra bashmayim mitachas loretz. You might think that there is a God over here. The Alter Rebbe asks, is there a God soaking mitachas loretz? Thus haste as elikim was gefindt sich. This means that an elikim. This is a God. This is a force. But number one, aleph gefindt sich. It finds itself. It is not rejecting just that Hashem is not here and trying to tell you he's here. We're saying that there might be, we're coming to reject, negate the idea that there is a God. There is a God. And based mamayim metachas la'aretz, that in water which is under the ground, vaser kipshutei, literally water, that there is a God. And we're coming to reject. No, that's not the God. The God that is under the water, that's not the God. Not that we're coming to reject that there is, that the Eibishter is also here, but we're coming to negate that there is no gods, there's no forces here. Even though there is forces in Mamayim and Takas La'aretz, There is no force like that. Now, how does Taka the Alter Rebbe know this? Maybe the pshat is like Pasuk is coming just to tell us not to reject other gods, that other forces that may be dominating the world, under the world. Who's talking about water, Bechlau? Maybe it's Pasuk just says Oretz. It says Vala Oretz mitochas, underneath, which would mean even lower than the water, which mean the earth. But who says? Maybe the word Oretz over here means the fact that Hashem is also supervising. That He didn't remove Himself, He didn't neglect, He didn't transfer powers to others, to the stars. And the pasuk is saying that Hashem is still in charge over here. Maybe that's what the pasuk says. How does the Alter Rebbe know that the pasuk is saying here that there's no other gods, forces over here, and that Hashem is uh, really the force? And the Rebbe says this is because this pasuk follows the previous psukim. The previous psukim talk about that if you see, and they talk specifically about the fish in the sea, and you're going to see the awesome fish, so you're going to come to think that there's forces over there because you see these great forces. So you might come to believe in those forces. That's why the pasuk that follows, it comes to negate that. What is the Alter Rebbe's proof? What does forces him to say that the pasuk is coming to tell us there is no God underneath the ground, the water? Or how does he know to say that? Because this command that you should know comes as a follow-up to Ator Esoladas, Goimer for Matan Torah, that the Eibishter by Matan Torah started to, the Eibishter showed you to know, Hashem hu ha'elikim, that Hashem is Elikim. So, so therefore this pasuk is coming to caution us about the opposites and to tell you no. The Torah is mazir. The Torah warns freer in pasuk before that in the verse. The pasuk says pentashchisun, you might corrupt goymer tavnis, and you make yourself an image of kol doga asher b'mayim. Any of the fish which is in the water, mitachas la'aretz, underneath the ground, of pen goymer, is their fun movement. So when this is understood, at those was the pasuk zokt on the noch, when the pasuk later on commands you, instructs you, be'emshich lazeh, v'yodaita goymer kashem hu alikim ba'loretz mitochas, kum shelo zayin dizal bazach, is coming to reject the same exact thing as is nito. There's no force, there's no God, there's no force in the water, underneath the water. This is what the forces the Alter Rebbe to say that this is the pshat from V'yodaito, that to make sure not to mistake that there is a God which is a force underneath, because the posting before, the corruption that the people will corrupt, will make fish images, and therefore as a follow-up, the pasuk is telling you, no, there's only Hashem, there's no fish, there's no gods there by the fish. So the question the Rebbe had is, why would one have to understand logically that the Eibishter's force and power only extends to the Bashamayim Mimal? Why would it not extend below? Why would it not extend? Why would they think that there's a Lakim in fish, or there's other forces on this world? Why would there be such a svara? And that exact question, the Rebbe says, is addressed by the Alter Rebbe in Shara Yichud Ve'Amuna. Gimel. Die Shaila now fragt der Alter Rebbe. This question that we're asking, why would we even think that there should be a force beneath, is asked by the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe asks, Would it then enter your mind that there is a force, there's a God soaking in the water beneath the earth? That we need to give so much warning. You should reflect to your heart, which means you have to really appreciate that and realize that. Why would there be such a strong svara to say otherwise? And the Alter Rebbe explains basically that we're not trying to say over here that there is no other force but Hashem. To say, to negate, the Pasuk is coming to tell us there is no other forces. Hashem is the only force. But we're actually trying to say there's nothing else besides Hashem. Not there's no other force. Not there's nothing else dominating. Hashem is the only dominating force. But to tell us there's nothing else, there's nothing. There is only Hashem. It's not another force, but there's nothing Hashem. And that is Mevayah. The Alter Rebbe explains, what is the command that you know that Hashem is Elokim? What this means to say, not to say there's another God, there's other force. There's just no entity. Besides Hashem. Everything is subjugated from its being by Hashem. By Hashem, there's nothing. For Hashem, there's no mitzvah, there's no entity, there's nothing. How does Alter Rebbe explain that? Because there can be no existence, nothing exists, only leaning and by the constant creation of Hashem, so there is no independent entity. They're always dependent, hinging on Hashem, so there is no mitzias. Warum? Because Bibal nivroim zainen nishabe geworden. Nit yesh miyesh, since created being came about, not one from another one, like gradual, one entity from another one. Nor b'derech b'di yesh mi'ayin, but in a way of something from ex nihil, from nothing. Darfun der Riber, the Nivroim, ständig onkommen, so therefore the created being constantly need to come on zum koyach habayra, to the power of the Creator. Kideze is bleiben b'mitziusums, for them to remain as entity, they need Hashem's power all the time. Und ob der koyach habayra wollte nicht alle gewonnen von dem Nivra, if that power of the Creator would be removed from the created being, even for an instant, God forbid, would not remain even vote von dem Nivra gleich geworden, b'derech meila. So from this created being, there would be automatically, Hashem wouldn't have to destroy it. It's dependent. If he removes that lifeline, that existence, then there's no existence. Gleich geworden b'derech meila, automatically behind. Be'efes mamish, k'moy lifnei sheishis imei bereishis mamish. Would be ended being nothing and zero, just like before the 6 days of creation. Und damit is euch verstandig, and that we also understand, for was der Posig sagt on, aber sondern why the Posig needs to give you a separate instruction, while Oretz B'tochas. Why do we need to say besides Shemaim also Oretz B'tochas? Because we need to caution you over here. Mela, when we say there is no entity in Shamayim and spiritual, okay. How could we say there's no entity over here when we feel things in a material way? It's all in front of us. Even this materialistic earth, Shaniris Yesh Gomur Lein Koil, which appears to be a complete entity. Everybody sees. How could you say that the material things in this world are not? Everybody sees they are. But to reflect and see, even this, he ayin Ve'efes mamash legabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is like nothing is zero next to Hashem. So the Rebbe explains from the Sharichot V'Amunah that we need to tell you that even materialistic things are non-entities. The whole Chiddush is here to tell you that the Eibishter is the only entity. And even the entity of this world is also a non-entity. Even though it defies what we see, what we know, it's completely, we see there is an entity, there's material, there's a physical world, and to tell us, it takes reflection that this is really nothing. But the Rebbe is not yet satisfied with this, because still, the fact that the Pasuk says, V'yodaito, means that there is actually a chilik. It's not only that it's the person's reflection that needs to be sort of work it through, even al haaretz. So if the pasuk would have just said Pasuk says v'yadaita, that means even in knowledge. So that the knowledge, so there's also a difference in the level. Aber l'chayra, darfen haben nateises beer. We need an additional explanation for that. Emestakim, let it be true. As we bal der inyan fun alorets mitochas einoid. Since this concept that the earth below there's nothing else, as oicha oretz hachumris shanidis yesh gomor, he ein vefes mamers, that also this materialistic world, what appears to be a complete entity, is really nothing, is neged achush. So this goes against the senses. We have the senses tell us that this does exist. So we need to caution that no, that is Hashem Elikim. That's why you got to reflect on it. The that's why we need a separate warning. Reflect to your heart that this is the case. As that this concept should be able to go through the heart of the person. Aber der Pasuk hebt sich doch an mit v'yodaito. It starts, you should know. It's not just talking about being able to internalize this idea to your heart, to see it, but the Torah starts on v'yodaito, to know. Was der Mufun is move on. As euch die Idee Sichos b'shayches alorutz mit tochas. That even this recognition, the logical knowledge or recognition that this earth below, we need a special warning that there might be a thought that maybe there is no logical thought. Maybe there is not the full Hashem Elikim in this physical materialistic world. And one can say, maybe in Shemaim, Mamal, yes. V'yodaito, but know that even below. But what is it? Isn't it move on? It's not understood. That's Boris. The logical explanation for this idea that there's nothing besides Hashem. As is nitoke mitzias chutz mimeno, there is no entity outside of Hashem. Because everything is totally subjugated, nullified from its existence by Hashem. Everything needs Hashem every instance. Is doch mechayev themselves in von ein oid, that forces the idea, the concept, the idea that ein oid, there's nothing but Hashem, equally by all creation, whether it's Bashamayim or Ba'aretz. Without any difference whatsoever between the armies of the heavens and the armies of the earth. Because any creation, if it's created from ex nihilo to existence, from nothing into something, Doesn't matter how high or how low, how Shamayim Ha'oretz. If it was created, it needs to be constantly created. There's no independence over there, so there's no entity over there. There needs to be continuously the power of the poil, the one that affects, in the one that is affected. Constantly, you need to have that power always in it. To vitalize it and to sustain it. So how could we make a distinction that you should know that you might think the idea sichlis as ein oid, this logical conclusion that there's nothing besides Hashem, that maybe one can logically conclude that the Eibishter is take ein oid when it comes to Bashamayim. But in Oretz, maybe it's not, and that's what the posuk has to tell about V'yodaito. Even logically, you should know that the Eibishter is here me'oretz mitochas. So basically, while the Alter Rebbe's point mainly speaks to the level of recognition, appreciation that people should be able to see even in physical things, which defies logic because it defies what we see in front of our eyes. To tell us that this is really non-existence, we need to say this more when we talk about this physical material things. But the Rebbe says this pasuk is also talking about logic, because it doesn't just say Bashavei Solovavecho, it says also V'yodaito Hayom Bashavei. That means that even though we may have a knowledge that Hashem Ulikim Bashamayim Imal, it may not extend to Aloretz Mitochas. The Rebbe wants to know, how could that be? If the reasoning, the rationalization is because everything created needs the koyach hapoel benifol, in this word it's a non-entity. So what difference does it make if it's bashamayim or it's mitochas? They all need the Eibishter. There's nothing else. The same ain't oid that tells us about shemayim. Why would there be a necessary v'yodaito also for aloretz mitochas? And the Rebbe further is going to prove this in the next ois from the Alter Rebbe, that there is actually over here a difference in the level of Shemayim and Oretz. Because it's interesting, when the Alter Rebbe brings the Toras HaBaal Shem Tov, that you need to create everything all the time, he says, La'olam Hashem dvorcha nitzov b'shamayim. Why did the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, bring the proof of the Baal Shem Tov? Yes, it's a pasuk, but you see in the pasuk we're talking about dvorcha nitzov b'shamayim. It doesn't say dvorcha nitzov ba'aretz. So you see this itself, that there is a difference, and the pshat is that we have to say, just like by Nitzav Bashamayim, the same thing is Ba'aretz, as the Rebbe will explain. Dalet. First, the Rebbe says, Noch ahi chochem. I'm going to bring you another proof. The Rebbe just told you that Al-Aretz Mitochas is not just for your reflection, but also that there might be an idea that we're rejecting the idea that logically Hashem is Bashamayim Imal, and we need to reject the idea that it's also an Haaretz Mitochas, not to make a distinction that this is a logical issue. The Rebbe brings this from the furthering of what the Alter Rebbe brings down in Sharichut Amura. Nochai Chocha. As the Chiluk zwischen Shamayim Imal und Al Haaretz Mitochas, that the difference between the telling us that the Einoid in the heavens above and on Oretz Mitochas is not nur zu bewarnen our toes von Odom HaNivra. It's not just to caution us about a mistake which the created person made, was come to leave them. That mistake is based upon Oretz HaChumris, Zet Ba'im Ois Vayesh Gomer, this physical world appears to the person as a complete entity. But there is also a logical distinction in logic, and we're telling you v'yadaito that you need to know that it's not like it may appear that these bashamayim mimal, but we're telling you no. Also, loretz mitochas in logic. So this is something that the Rebbe is going to prove that this is what the pasuk is coming to tell us, not just because we may feel, but it's also that there's not to come to a logical difference. How do I know this? So the Rebbe says like this: If dem inyan as nivroim muzen onkumen ständig zum koyach haboire, and this idea that the created being need to constantly come on to the power of the Creator. So aufhalten their mitzias to sustain their existence. Bring der Alter Rebbe, den Pirush Abal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe brings the interpretation of Al Shem Tov in Posik, La'olam Havaya Dvorcha Nitzov Bashamayim. Al Shem Tov teaches the Posik in Tillim, which says that forever your word stays in the Shemayim. What does the Baal Shem Tov explain? Which word is always Bashamayim? As the Vorcha Sha'amarta, those words that you said, Yehira Kiya B'Seich HaMayim V'Gayim, let there be a firmament within the water. Teves va'oisies elu hey nitzaves va'imdes la'elam. These words and these letters are continuously standing. Nitzaves and standing la'elam b'toich l'kiyah shemayim. They are standing within the firmament of the shemayim la'chiyosem to vitalize them. The Vorcha, the pasuk is saying, your words. Hashem originally created the world Basoram Amoris. Hashem said, Yehira Kiya B'Seich HaMayim. Those are the words of the Eibishter in creation of the world. So that Vorcha is Nitzah B'Shamayim. They're standing forever within the Rekiyah Shamayim to vitalize them. They're always there. And then the Alter Rebbe continues. Unis Mamshich HaZoy is nit nor b'negeya to Shamayim. He says this is not only as it pertains to the Shemayim. Nor v'chein b'chol habruyim sheb'chol ha'olamos al yenu v'tachtonim. Same thing is true for all worlds, the upper and the lower worlds. V'afilu eretz halezu hagashmis, and also this physical world, u'b'chinas deimem mamish, and even the inanimate, is also continuously the words of their creation of that Asodem Amoris in the beginning, that continues to sustain them. Is a ganze Messias is ständig abhängig. Their entire existence is constantly hinges upon from the Oisius Hadibur Ma'asodem Amoris, from the letters of the speech of the 10 sayings, Hamachayis Umahavas Es Adoimim, that vitalize and create inanimate liyes yesh ma'im ve'efes, to be an entity from nothing and zero. Everything in the world needs us. But that's what the Alter Rebbe says, and the Alter Rebbe continues to say, but what about those created beings that don't have a special saying in the Asara Mamoris? They too, by means of extension, they also come from the 10 saying. And further and even more, he continues, also those creations which are not mentioned in the Asara Mamoris Shebetoira, in the 10 sayings of the Torah. From the Asara Mamoris. They get their vitality extends to them from the 10 sayings. They come. It's also the 10 saying includes everything, even the other things that are not clearly mentioned in there. They come by evolution from one level to the other level. It brings different ways, the way exchange and the way the letters exchange, but It all comes in Sodom Amos. Was das ist Shmoi Asher Yikru Loi B'Loshen HaKodesh. It ends up being, what is his chayis? The Hebrew name, the name in Loshen HaKodesh that you call the item, that's his chayis. That's the chayis for Sodom Amos as it came down through Shtalshus. That becomes the vessel to that restricted vitality into these letters of this name that evolved from the 10 sayings of the Torah. So there was different names, and from those names, eventually it filtered down to the limited level of these vessels, as in this name. That's what the Alter Rebbe says there. But the Rebbe points to, why are we specifically talking about Shemayim over here? This is true about everything. That means that there is something more about Shemayim than even which follows the rest of it. Und der Fun was der Posik is medayik zu sagen. The fact that the Posik specifically tells us La'olam Hashem devorcha nitzu b'shamayim, that your word stands in the Shamayim. Oistel lik Shamayim from alle anderen Nivroim, singling out Shamayim from all other creations. Was in einem Posik redt sich bechlal nit b'yachas zu dis vargosh Adam. In that Posik, he doesn't talk at all about how it relates to the knowledge and the feeling of the Pasuk. It's just talking about the way it comes down. You can't say that Pasuk because a person might think differently or it feels easier. This is talking about the way it happens, the fact that the Eibishter is in the Shamayim. And because of his verstandig, as the chiluk zwischen Shamayim and Oretz, that the difference between heavens and the earth is nit nor mitzad model. It's not just because of the person. Not as oich emes is, but this is also something which is truth. In them oifum with the vorcha gefindt sich in sei, that there is a difference. Truthfully, the way that the vorcha finds itself, there's a difference with the way it's in Shamayim and the way it comes down to the lower levels. Faran achilit from Shamayim. There's a difference between Shamayim, Ulala, andere Nivroim, and all other creations. Was der Far wird in dem Posuk der Mondavke Shamayim. That's why in this verse is mentioned specifically Shamayim, because there is the Vorcha Mitzvah, the way it's Bashamayim on a higher level. Umitzad dem Chiluk, and because of this difference that it's in Shamayim on a higher level, is the Achidush. That's what the Pasuk, a novelty in the minyan from Hashem Elikim Goimer. So we also need to know Hashem Elikim Al Oretz Mitochas Lagabe Bashamayim Emal, that there is a novelty, that the Eibishter is even, because there is a level that Shamayim is Nitzol Bashamayim on a higher level, and because of that, the Pasuk has to tell us that the Eibishter is not only Bashamayim Emal, but al oretz mitocha. So this is the Rebbe's conclusion. The Rebbe wants to explain now why that there is a difference, the manifestation, the way the Eibishter is the Vorcha Nitzor Bashamayim, and the way the Vorcha is Ba'aretz. The Rebbe will explain it's not that the Eibishter just creates everything in a way of a distance, but it's in a way of his slapshus, dressing up. And therefore, the actual mitzias of the created being, in its mitzias, is a non-mitzias because its mitzias is the Eibishter. And therefore, its mitzias makes a difference between Shemayim and Oretz, as the Rebbe will continue to explain. Hey, so now the Rebbe begins his explanation. V'yeshloimar der biur in them. The Rebbe explains now the biur, the explanation in this. And the Rebbe will explain that the Baal Shem Tov did not only tell us that everything needs the Eibishter, but rather that there is a dressing up from the higher force within each entity. The Chiddush from Baal Shem Tov is the Nabta Baal Shem Tov is nit nor in Klolusin. It's not just a general idea, as the Metzias von alle Nivroim, that the existence of all creation is abhängig, is dependent from the Koyach Habayre on the power of the Creator. Was is a ständig Mahaba Machayim Machayim, which continuously brings them into being, vitalizes them, sustains them. Not only in them Teuchen Pratisha Bazeh, but also in the detail content in that vitalization. As dvorcho shomarto yehi rekia b'soicha mayim v'gomer. These words that you said, there shall be a ferment within the water. Tevis v'oisius elu hey nitzoves v'aimtes lo'ilum. These words and these letters are continuously standing fast and standing forever. B'toich rekia hashamayim. They are inside the firmament of the Shemayim. And they're dressed up within all of these guys. There is a connection. There is no distance. It's not they're created from far away, but specifically that there's an oir, there's a vitality that dresses up, is nislabish in detail into Rakia Shamayim and all the Rakiyim, and by all creations. Same thing, similar is by all created beings. As in jeden von sie is parandi his slapshius oisis adim masor memoris. In each one of the created being, there is a dress up, the letters of the speech of the Asor Mamoris, from the Asor Mamoris dresses up in them. Das heißt, which means that Inyan is nit as der Nivra muss ankommen, euch likiyumai zum koyach habayrim. So what we're saying over here is this: it's not only that the created being must, just for his existence, needs a power to bring him in. If there's no power, he can't exist. So you bring him into his existence, and then after you bring him to existence, it needs always, but aber der noch is der Nivra abgeteilt von dem Koyach HaMahave Oisu Mekaimei. But then later on, it is separated from the power that brings it into being and sustains it. He's separate, he's different. Al derech. So say, for example, wie der Eure HaShemesh was kommt und wird und ist abhängig von der Moire HaShemesh. The light of the sun, which comes about and is here. We have the shine of the sun, and it depends on the luminary. We only get a shine when there is sun. If there is no, if we don't connect to the sun, there's no shine here. If there's clouds interfering, we won't get the shine here. As soon as there is an interruption, something that interferes, zwischen dem Oir und dem Moir, in between the light and the luminary, wird der Oir bottle, the light ceases. Und von deswegen, but still, is der Oir a besonder Sach von dem Guf HaShemesh. But still, while he needs constantly the Oir HaShemesh to be there, but it's still a separate entity than the body of the sun. The Oir HaShemesh is the shine of the sun, and the body of the sun is the body too. Nor der koyach, but by the Eibishter it's different. Der koyach haboyre tut sich on in dem nivra atzmai. The power of the Creator dresses up in the created being himself. We're saying that it has to be inside mislabish, in the nivra, not just that the Nivra needs it for its sustenance to sustain, but that he is there inside. And thus Davke geht zu verstehen. Specifically, this gives us an understanding. This is be'emes u b'shleimus ein oid, how it's truthfully and completely ein oid. Siz nito kein mitzias, to explain that there is no entity oiser getlichkeit besides godliness. Warum wie bald as the dvar havaye is melubesh in dem nivra, since the word of Hashem is dressed up in this created himself. In dem ort von dem nivra, in the place where there's the creation, Hashem is dressed in by the nivra. Kommt ois. So it turns out, as the nivra werd klal nit nifrat von dem dvar havaye, so it turns out that the created being at all does not become separated. Not just that he's reliant as, but he stays there. There's no separation from the Dvar Havaya and the created being. Bis as der Chayis, the nefesh from jeder nivra proti, to the extent that the vitality and the soul of every individual created being is their Dvar Havaya, is in Melubash, is the word of Hashem that's dressed in him. That's his, in the nivra, that's his Chayis. B'meila is moving. And therefore it's understood as kol nivra v'yesh u'be'emes nechshav la le'efes mamish, that every created being, every entity is really considered to be nothing and zero mamish. Only, the Rebbe says in the bracket, that only with this explanation, that the Dvar Hashem dresses itself up. So it means that the Dvar Hashem finds itself in the nivra. It's not only for its existence, but if it exists, it's not, it's separate. It's the Oir Hashem. No, it is, Dvar Hashem is within it. V'yesh loymar. Ados is Oich der Tam, favos jeder Nivra muss haben a besunder Dvar Havai. This is also the reason why every created being needs to have its own Dvar Havai. The Alter Rebbe is Meirich, as the Alter Rebbe is at length, as gam b'doime mamish yesh nefesh v'chayis ruchim, is that also in inanimate there exists a soul and a spiritual chayis. Each one needs their own soul. Weil kidei ezel kenen zayin di hislapshus, in order for it to be able to dress up from the mkoyach haboire in the nivra proti, from the power of the Creator into that individual created being, dav der koyach eliki arop losen sich kaviyachol. So that godly power needs to descend, go down, so to speak, mimadrigosi, from its level, unisamtsum werden, and to restrict, become restricted, lifi erech dem nivra, relative to the created being, b'chol nivra v'nivra, the proto, in each creation, and creation into its details. If the godly power will remain in its level, a power, unlimited power, is there dan hecher, then he is higher, uncomparable from being able to be dressed up in the created being. In order to be able to be dressed up in the created being, he needs to descend. So each one needs their own, because there's a different descent, there's a different level, there's a different detail. And we know that the Eibishter has to dress itself up, because that's really ein oid milvadei. There's no existence, because in the place of the Nivra, the Chayis Hashem is the Dvar Hashem. That's what is existence. Now, doesn't mean that the Eibishter needs to do that. The Eibishter chose to do that. The Eibishter doesn't really have to. The Eibishter can stay in Bli Gvul and create Gvul. But the Eibishter wanted it to be in a way that it will come down into the Nivra. Ba'afal pi, as mitzad them was the Eibishter is akol yochel, because the Eibishter can do anything. Volt euch sein koyach ein sofi, even the infinite power of Hashem. Gekent mislabish sein en an Nivra mugbal. It could have dressed up in a limited created being. Hat der Eibishter gewollt, Hashem wanted, as the Nivroim zon kennen haben Avona Vasoga. He wanted that the created being should have to be able to have a understanding, a grasp, but to the extent possible. According to the limitation, the Eibishter wanted to limit them. So in order, he wanted it to make sense to a certain extent in the human capacity limitation to understand a little bit. In Seder V'Ofen Abriya, in the order and how the creator is created. Und der Pharot der Baschafen, the Nivroim, and that's why the Eibishter created the created being. Nicht in an Öfen, was is the Gamri Bein Aroich von dem Nivra Mugel, not in a way in which it's totally uncomparable to the limited created being, Mitzat Kol Yochel, because Hashem could do it. So he can create from Blikvul an uncomparable Mugmeldik thing. Nor Davke mit HaSeder V'Hadroga, but specifically with an order and a step-by-step. The Voeschanan Meforsim in the public known language say that Ishtauslos, an order of Ishtauslos involved. And the Eibishter is mit Samtzim seine Hashpoah v'chayis, that the Eibishter restricts his flow and his energy, bises of Zayin, to the extent it should be liferach, it should be according, comparable, Arab to come and be slapshed in the Nivra, to come and dressed up in the Nivra, to the created being. So the Eibishter could, but the Eibishter didn't do that because the Eibishter wanted it to be in a way that we should be able to grasp it to a certain extent. And that's why we all need each one, because to really be ein oid, we needed to have the koich hachayis, and that's came down to ishtalshelus, and that's why we all need a specific oir to vitalize that nira. And Vov, now we can explain the novelty was that Inyan from Hashem hu alikim, saying that Hashem is alikim is eingeteilt in drei Yidiyas Chalukas. It has been divided up in three divided up knowledges. Bashamayim Mimal, heaven v'ala'oretz mitochas, and ein oid, the heavens, the earth, and ein oid afilu b'chalolo shalolim, even in the hall of the world. Bald der Inyan von ein oid is verbunden damit, since the ein oid is tied to the fact was der koyach habeira is being slapshus in the nivra, that the power of the creator is dressed up in the created being. Volt given an ortsu mechalik sein. So then there could be room to make a distinction. When do we say as the dvar havai gefin sich bi slapshus b'nivroim, that it finds itself dressed up in created being? B'tzva shamayim. When we talk about the armies of the heavens, they are higher created being. And therefore they are a vessel to the power and the godly vitality. So we can say over there, the Dvorche Nitzov is Bashamayim, is stuck over there. As opposed to in the earth below. In Nivroim, Artziim, V'chumriim, in earthy and materialistic creations, which are not a vessel to godliness, so you could have thought, if not for the Pasuk, was the Dvar Havai is in Zinzei nit be'oifun fun islapshus, that the word of Hashem is not dressed up. Of course, the ein oid that they need the Eibishter, but it doesn't come down with tzumtzum for them for slapshus. They müssen ständig ankommen zu koyach habeire zu aufhalten sie ihr. Yes, they would need the power of the Creator to continuously keep up their existence. Aber der koyach hapoil is nicht in an Eufon as gefindt sich in sebi slapshus. But the power that impacts is not in a way that it dresses up in them, that it degraded, it descended to their level. Und danach kommt zu a größerer Chiddush. And then it comes even a greater novelty. As a viele die Nivroim welche werden nicht der Mond Basora Vamorische Beteure. Even those created beings which are not mentioned in the 10 sayings. The Haina Zelche Nivroim Pchuse Ha'erech. That means these are less valuable created beings, which are not able to receive their vitality from the Asorim Amodah Shebetoida. They cannot get it directly from the 10 sayings of the Torah itself. Nor der Chayis mus yerizay madrega, but the vitality must descend from one level to the other level. Ad sheyuchal samtzim slabish lishabes men, according from the Tanya, to the ability that it can be restricted, and to dress up and to create from it nivra proti, is oich dort avayahu alikim, oich dort avodir Hashem alikim. That is the chalol shaloilom. That is the places which is even lower. The Rebbe doesn't say this beferish, but that's understood that this is the third category, the level of chalol shaloilom. So therefore, because we say that it has to come down every nivra, and the fact that everything needs the Eibish's Chayis, that's a general statement which applies to everything. But to have it come down to the level of each of these creations, there's three categories. So while we could understand easier via Daita that it's B'Shamayim Imal, we have to tell us no. Not only in the refined and higher worlds which are a keli to godliness, but also into the level. And then also to those who are not even mentioned in the Torah by name, and it's nishtalsel, they too have the chayis aliki, the dvaravai and the slabish in them. And now the Rebbe is going to bring it out in Avodas Hashem. Oizai. Yeder inyan is oich faram b'avodas kol echad ve'echad. Every idea that we discussed now can also apply to each person's avodah. Because we're talking about creation of the world, a person is a microcosm of the world. Vorum der Adam is an Olam Kotten. The person is a small world. In Vemen spiegel sich up, it's mirrored by a person, the Inyonim was tun sich oif in the Olam Godlum. He mirrors those matters which are accomplished in the great world. The great world, we were talking about the level of creation of Hashem's engagement and the way he comes down into the world. In a similar way, it's in the small world, the Olam Kotten, the microcosm, the human being. The tachlis von jedem inyan von Avodas Hashem is, the ultimate goal of every matter in the service of Hashem is, that it should be coming down into action, into practical action. And action is the main, which is it's down on the ground, the bottom line. We need to have a noas, in Oretz, in order to reach to the earth, in order to be able to penetrate, inculcate matters, earthly matters with godliness and kedusha, darf men durchgehen, you need to go through an order of evolution. Was bechlolu sein in dem Veran der Shlovim, in general, there are three rungs, three steps. The drei chalukas in Posik, there's three different parts, distinctions in this verse. In the verse Yodaita. Allah Bashamayim Mimal, first step, the heavens above. Beis Valoretz Mitochas, on the earth below. And number three, there's nothing even in the hollow of the world. The Rebbe says in the bracket, and fitting to these three categories was the Alter Rebbe Zog. The Alter Rebbe says, Aleph, Lo'ilam Havaya, Dvorcha Nitzah Bashamayim. Shem's words stay in the heavens. That's the Shamayim. B'toich Rikiya Shamayim, within the firmament of Shamayim. Beis, V'chein B'chol Habruim V'afilu Eretz Alazor Gashmi. Number two, all creation, even in this physical world, that's the Eretz. And Gimel, Afilu the Nevroim P'chusa Erech, even the less valuable created, which are not mentioned in the 10 sayings of the Torah. Kedei de avodas hayom von Aiden soll sein kedeboy. In order that the service of a Yid should be properly, as it should be, Dav Zayin Dachona Lizeh needs to be preparation. Shinosu, he has to sleep. Kichelik Mavodas Hashem. Malayla, sleeping at nighttime is part of the service of Hashem, so that he can properly serve Hashem. He has to be ready. Was demult is the neshama oila lamayla b'shamayim. Then the neshama during the sleep goes up to the shamayim. Unshoeves lochaim, it draws life on the spirit from the shamayim. V'yesh loymar, we can say as oich der fun is, and that also from that is miyad shenir. As soon as he wakes up, tekev and erweckt sich auf vom Schlaf. As soon as he wakes up from this sleep, as the instruction is miyad shenir, Hypter on them says that it says the instruction in the Siddur, Hypter on them say that Ayoim, he begins the order of the day with Amiras Moida Ani Lefonecha Chulu Shechzarta Binishmosi. He thanks Lefonecha before you that you've given me back my soul. He gives a thank before him to Hashem. Was it im umgekehrt the Nishome that has returned to him the soul mit abgefrischte Keuches, with refreshed energies, strength from Shorsha Bashmaim, from the root in heaven. Because sleeping is the preparation, but within the day itself, you start with Moedani Lefanecha. That's also the Lefanecha, that we're starting the day with Shamayim. From Shorsha Bashmaim. So the day itself, actually, not only the preparation, the sleeping, in which it goes up, but also the day itself. Then begins the service of a Yid to poil sein, as the neshama sheloi soll sich mishpasit sein in sein guf, to impact that his soul should expand to the body. That is accomplished through the service of davening. The shama soll sich onheden in der gashmius guf. So that means that the soul should be sensed. You should feel the soul in the body. Artzius shalodom, in the earthy of the person. Bring it down into the person. When in them gufas and faranzvei madreges. Now here you have two separate, two different steps, two last steps. Aleph avodas hatfila bebeis haknesses. The davening in shul, that's holiness in the shul. Bebeis haknesses lebeis hamedrash. And all in the holy places from shul, and then you go out to the world. So the first thing is the davening, whether it's in shul davening or from shul you go, then from shul you go to Beis Medrash to learn. But through this conduct of shul, Beis Medrash, the light of the neshama expands to the body, all details, all matters. But it's all in the world of holiness. This would be the comparable to those created that get their energy directly from Asora Mamora Shabbat, from the 10 sayings of the Torah. And that's one. But number two is the Avodah B'Chalolo Shalom, working in the hollow of the world. Is the conduct of the way of the world. Generally, Vosaid Farnemtzich. That a Yid occupies himself with optional matters. That would be similar to the detail, the specific created being, who are not mentioned in the 10th saying of the Torah. To his proper preparation from his service. That would be the Moedani Lefanecha. V'aloretz mitochas, the davening and the learning. And within it, the second aspect. Then he can bring it down as well. By him is the Gashmis Olam Ganzen Teufus Mokim. It doesn't take up any place. It's totally bottled. As a noid Mitzias, that is Magala Eich B'Chalolo Shalolam. He also reveals in the hollow of the world This is ein oid. There is nothing else. This is Sichos. Yom Beis the Chag HaShavuos, Tavshin Memei.